Good evening and thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Nick Blumberg. Texas Democrats take refuge in Illinois to block a Trump-backed gerrymandering push.
He's trying to buy an insurance policy, go to the friendliest states he can find and up the number in the Republican majority, so it's easier for him to hang on to Congress.
Lone Star lawmakers evacuate their hotel after a bomb threat as a Texas senator claims the FBI will help track down the quorum breakers.
I'm here today because the elected leaders in this state of Illinois are ignoring the law.
Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem makes a return visit as the Department of Justice adds Chicago, Cook County, and Illinois to its list of sanctuary jurisdictions.
Every day in our ER, we see people who cannot afford to wait. Seconds matter, minutes matter.
Uptown's Weiss Hospital appears to be winding down after more than 70 years. Plus, the feds reverse course on 2 Chicago environmental and housing discrimination cases. Wildfire smoke chokes Chicago's skies. And a new pension measure adds more weight to the city's already crushing debt. And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Rob Hart from WBBM News Radio, Shruti Singh from Bloomberg News, Monica Ang of Axios Chicago, and from the Chicago Tribune editorial board, Hillary Gowans. Thank you all for being here. Let's get right to it. Rob, these 50-plus Texas legislators hold up here trying to block a quorum in the special session aimed at adding 5 safe Republican congressional districts. But given the fact that the GOP controls Texas state government, is this more or less delaying the inevitable, you think?
Well, they have gone to this playbook before. 20 years ago, actually more than 20 years ago, 2003, when Tom DeLay was the House Majority Leader, they wanted to do the same thing. They wanted to draw out 5 Democratic districts in Texas and to make them more Republican friendly. And in that case, the 50-plus Democrats in the state legislature crossed the border into Oklahoma. And different situation back then. They only had 5 days to run out the clock until the end of the session, but they were national news. Willie Nelson sent them red bandanas and whiskey, so people did follow their cause. It became a nationwide story. In this situation, though, it's a special session. The governor of Texas can call it again and again and again if he wants to. And the problem here for the Democrats who are holed up here in Illinois is that they have to hold out until November or December, because that's the filing deadline for candidates running in next year's primary election. And can they hold out for the next couple of months? Can they stay in Illinois for the next couple of months? Will they stick together for the next couple of months? That's the real question here.
Yeah, especially with $500 a day fines, being levied at them for missing session. Monica, obviously the Democrats here have some limited tools to block the redistricting effort. They've said this is one of the few things they can do, but do you imagine some Democratic voters might be happy to see, officials from their party finally using some of the kind of hardball tactics that Trump and the GOP employ?
There seems to be some appetite for it. And on the other hand, this is a great platform for J.B. Pritsker to be kind of on national TV. He was on Colbert, for Juliana Stratton to say, hey, and by the way, I'm running for senator. So you could say there's some grandstanding on that side. But yeah, and to your point, will they be able to run out the clock, or is this just sort of a symbolic motion at the time?
Yeah, some Democrats, Hillary, have floated the idea of kind of fighting fire with fire, launching their own redistricting efforts to create some new safe Democratic seats. Do you think that's likely to actually happen?
Well, I guess I would go back to the optics of this whole thing. You mentioned the Colbert appearance, and there was this really funny moment when Stephen Colbert held up a picture of Illinois' super gerrymandered political maps and asked JB if he thought that this snaky district made sense. Yeah. And I thought that was perfect. So I guess I think it's real. This is a hard issue for JB to try to stand up and be the hero trying to save democracy. Rahm Emanuel said something earlier this week. He said something like this idea that you can change the rules of the game midway through and call it redistricting is wrong. I think that's the right sentiment. And when we focus all of our energies on making sure political parties have adequate power to the voters who lose out in the end.
Yeah, maybe this will be, actually the thing that pushes the nation toward independent redistricting, although, that's always an iffy proposition, I think.
But you keep believing that.
That's right. And I've got a bridge to sell you, by the way. Well, speaking of Governor Pritsker, Shruti, late last week, he signed that law boosting pension benefits for some Chicago police and firefighters. That drew a pretty sharp warning from a ratings agency. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so S&P Global Ratings earlier this week warned that this particular piece of legislation that Governor Pritsker signed is going to make it more difficult for the city of Chicago. It's already facing a more than $1 billion deficit for 2026 and an even bigger one in 2027. Now, let's talk about two different things. One, we're talking about the deficit, and then you've got this annual payment that the city has to make as part of its budget. But then they've got a much bigger unfunded pension liability, and that's what this legislation really sort of affects, which is the unfunded pension liability, which is already at $36.5 billion for the city's pension funds, and then this could potentially add another more than $11 billion long term.
And those sorts of liabilities, what kind of an effect can that have on the city? Its ability to borrow, its ability to balance its budget, things like that.
Yeah, so pensions are actually one of the largest costs for the city of Chicago. Property taxes are a major talking point in the city of Chicago, and I don't know if everyone realizes, but almost 80% of property taxes actually go towards pension payments. So people are seeing their property taxes increase over the last decade. A lot of that has gone to increase the contributions towards pensions because they were so severely underfunded for so long, and now the city is playing catch up. But let me just point out also that the city is not the only place where pensions are underfunded.
Sure.
The state of Illinois also underfunded.
Oh, absolutely. It's a tradition. It goes around here. Rob, the governor said Mayor Johnson didn't, ask him to veto the bill. The mayor says his CFO filed a witness slip in opposition, which for folks who don't know, takes about 30 seconds to do. Why do you think we didn't see a stronger push from the city on this?
This seems to be a pattern of broken communication between City Hall and Springfield, which is shocking because you have a liberal mayor, you have a Democratic governor, and a Democratic governor from the city of Chicago, but it seems time and again, whether we're talking about pensions, whether we're talking about transit funding, the lack of coordination becomes very apparent when a lot of these measures either are passed without the knowledge or approval of one party, or legislation affecting Chicago fails on the 5-yard line.
Yeah, it's a lot of critical issues there where there seems to be sort of a mismatch. I mean, Hillary, talking of property taxes, obviously the mayor does not want to raise property taxes to pay for these pensions, not to mention to deal with that budget gap. But, the trip pushed back on one of the ideas he has floated, sort of a corporate head tax. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that could be the wrong approach?
Well, I think anyone who follows our job market, our economy, realizes that we have fallen behind. Our growth is pretty stagnant. And business leaders, ranging from the folks at CME across the board, have said doing something like this would cause them to seriously consider leaving. And that's very dangerous, obviously, for not just our economy, but for the people who live and work here. It would also be something that would significantly dry up a lot of revenue that the city depends upon. This has been floated for several years, and it's very unpopular. Pritsker doesn't like it. Yeah. Johnson should probably think of some other ideas to consider.
You can go back to the Richard J. Daley proposing the head tax in 1976. Mayor Byrne considered one in 1980. I think every mayor at one time or another has kicked around the idea before realizing the math is just is pretty dire for the city if they go ahead with that.
But this tax was actually just sunset a little over a decade ago.
Right.
It was actually in place until about 2014. So yeah, and so this is something that was not popular, and former Mayor Emanuel actually had said this was something that hurt jobs. So we'll see what happens, but the negotiations right now for the budget are ongoing, and we haven't seen yet exactly where things are going to land. Yeah,
but it seems like, for business leaders, it has to be a factor that they're considering, whether when they're moving to Chicago or, considering relocating. Is that fair to say? A big thing on their mind? So, one of the things that, whether it's at the state level or at the city level, people will always point out is that Chicago, according to, some trade publications, is a top
relocation spot. But at the same time, we've seen some big names leave. In terms of overall growth, the city of Chicago, I think you and I spoke about this a month or so ago, but the city's growth rate does lag some of the other large metropolitan regions. And so there are questions about, can they catch up?
Well, I was going to say, it is one of the few things that the mayor does have in his hands. If he wants to do a payroll tax to make up the funds,
right,
he'd have to ask Springfield. But this one he could do on his own.
Yeah. Well, Monica, sticking with you for a minute, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem back in Illinois today, claiming local sanctuary laws are aimed at protecting dangerous folks, criminals. We also saw the state, the city, and the county added to a sanctuary jurisdictions list. Do we think that really has any practical effect?
I think everybody already knew Chicago and Illinois were sanctuary areas. And Kristi Noem getting up there and saying that J.B. Pritsker and Brandon Johnson are protecting criminals, it just, yes, there are some, and Pritzker's been clear. He said, absolutely, if someone is a convicted criminal, get them out of here. But the statistics show that the vast number of people, especially recently, have been people with no criminal record. And so it just seems to be a misrepresentation.
Yeah, and it seems like, with repeated visits, Illinois is somewhere that they see as a place that they can, make some political arguments.
Oh, yeah.
But even if there's not necessarily sort of a practical, effect of anything. Well, sticking with the Trump administration for a minute, Hillary, the Trib took aim this week at, what you called Trump's shakedown of universities, saying it's un-American. What do you see as the danger there?
Well, I'm a Northwestern alum, so this week...
Go Cats.
Yes, indeed. So this week, for example, I saw several of the folks who worked with me when I was a student post on LinkedIn saying that their jobs had been cut because of funding concerns. And so on a personal level, it's sad to see what's happening. And of course, this is just part of a bigger reckoning taking place in higher education across the board, with fewer young people choosing to go to university in the first place. Student loan debt is a huge concern for people. So I think universities are really already feeling the crunch, and so this adds a level of uncertainty that is causing a lot of concern, distress, uncertainty for folks at universities.
Well, and it's interesting too, because traditionally, at least for K-12 schools, the GOP has often resisted having sort of a nationalized curriculum. There was big pushbacks to some efforts under the Obama administration. So it's odd to see things sort of flip now, where it seems as though the Trump administration is taking a direct interest in university curricula.
Yeah, I think we would all agree higher education is really important, that universities should be places where intellectual curiosity, freedom, diversity should be fostered and encouraged, and when things get in the way of that, we should be upset about that.
Yeah. Well, Rob, another Trump administration move, the Department of Housing and Urban Development reportedly dropping 2 Chicago cases, one that would have blocked the metal scrapper, once known as General Iron, from moving to the southeast side. Do you think we could see that plan revived, or is there still enough opposition at City Hall that it's not very likely?
Well, in the case of the Trump administration dropping the suits, this is simply a case of a new presidency coming in with a different Justice Department and different priorities. But that is certainly 2 cases that were on the back burner as other priorities took precedence, but they had been around for a while, and maybe with a change in administrations in 2029, that could be filed once again. But right now it just seems like it's just where we are. It's where we're at with a very ideological administration in Washington.
Yeah, despite the unpopularity of that proposal. Speaking of pollution, environmental matters, Monica, thanks to Canadian wildfire smoke, Chicago apparently had the world's worst air quality. Why was our air worse than places closer to the fires?
That's a great question. And my colleague Carrie Shepard asked meteorologists, and they said because of the fire close to Canada would go high up in the air. And because of the way the winds were going, it landed right in Chicago. We were like in exactly the wrong spot. We also asked, why was the air so much worse for people 25 and under versus a middle-aged person like me? And Brian Erbushevsky of the Respiratory Foundation said that your lungs are actually still developing till 25, and any damage you get during that period can really haunt you for the rest of your life. So, all the young people dancing around for 4 days outdoors at Lollapalooza, I was like, guys, come on, cool it.
I know, and it's, one of the things that you have to think about is, what are whether it's someone under 25 or someone older, the long-term effects that we're likely to have to be, grappling with as these, summer wildfire smoke drifts, seem like they're becoming kind of the new normal.
Yeah, and people are not really taking it that seriously, especially young people I saw were having a great time outdoors during the 4 days when everyone's like, stay indoors if you can.
Yeah, right. No exertion. I think that includes, jumping around
Moshing
at a concert.
in the mosh pit, yeah.
Exactly. Well, Shruti, we mentioned the other case HUD is dropping involves the use of aldermanic privilege to block affordable housing in a particular ward. I have to imagine it's a frustrating setback for affordable housing advocates given, as you've reported on, there's just a huge nationwide shortage here.
Yeah, I mean, just about a year ago when the DNC was here, I remember talking to a variety of different mayors from large and small cities, and the one theme that I remember hearing about constantly was the need for affordable housing and the constant question about how they were going to be able to do that, whether it was zoning changes, whether it was stimulus funding or any sort of help. And this is a nationwide problem, not just here in Chicago.
And of course, the forever problem of aldermanic privilege is something that we've heard the last couple of mayors talk about, but kind of a tough nut to crack to actually do away with.
Yeah, I mean, how do you stop other alders from saying, okay, if you wash my hand, I'll wash yours. If you don't want this in your ward, I'll back you up, and you'll do that same. You can't legislate that. That's people siding with their colleagues.
Yeah, it's hard to break them out of that pattern, I'd imagine. Well, Hillary, after sort of floating the idea of the state assuming control of CPS, State Representative Curtis Tarver now says he doesn't really see much appetite for a full takeover. But do you think we could see some more kind of piecemeal efforts at state control, or is the idea kind of dead for now?
I think he's right. I think nobody really wants to see another statewide takeover. I think local control of school districts is really important. That said, there's sort of this feeling like, well, we kind of need to see how bad things get before we figure out what to do. And we're in this interim period where that's still playing itself out. Local control is important, but the local leadership needs to be willing to take on these hard conversations about the massive budget deficit we talked about earlier, and balancing the needs of kids and families and figure out how to make it work.
Yeah, you have to imagine that it's going to be, tough for them to get money from, the state of Illinois if there isn't some sort of give and take there.
Yeah. I think that's going to be a situation that we're going to see live in the next week or two. The CEO of CPS is going to be presenting the budget in short order, probably by Wednesday, and then the school board has to vote on it by the end of the month. And they're trying to close a budget gap of $734 million. That's, a lot of money for a district that's already very cash strapped and has a lot of needs.
Yeah.
It's not chump change. And I went to one of those community listening sessions, and everyone said, yeah, we don't want to see cuts in the classroom. But they also, when they looked at $800 million in just debt financing every year, they said, we don't want to see any more borrowing, but borrowing is on the table.
Yeah, well,
yeah, so one of the challenges is that there's been so much talk about whether CPS should take on more loan. And I cover the bond market along with covering budgets, and what we're seeing right now is that the high yield market, which is basically junk borrowers, which CPS is the largest in that particular segment of the market, their costs are going up. The yields to actually borrow are actually up right now, and so this is a tough time for someone that has a junk rating to enter the market.
Yeah.
And there's a question mark right now about whether they're going to borrow to cover a pension payment or whatever, but they're an entity that has borrowed from the market regularly, as does the city, as does the state, so they're not alone. But right now is a tough time for someone with that rating to come to the market because the yields are just higher.
Yeah, if they're going to try to close some of the budget gap through borrowing, it's going to be a lot more difficult for them. Well, despite its many challenges, Monica, you reported on CPS expanding its roster of sustainable community schools. What's the detail?
So they've added 16 of them. They had 20. It's part of the union contract to add 70 over the course of the contract. They cost about $500,000 per school to add services like health services, meals, parental education. They can help people apply for social services. And many people do feel it's a good model. I don't think the data is all there to say that it's really changed everyone's lives, but yeah, it was a weird time to say, we're going to take on this new expense when they're like, we need to find $734 million in the couch cushions.
Right. Does anybody have something laying around that we could get our hands on real quick? Yeah, but I mean, you have to imagine, maybe the hope there is to draw, students and families into the district or keep them in the district through these sorts of expanded, services.
That would be one way to look at it. The other thing is they say, yeah, if you can keep kids in the schools, if you can make the community and the neighborhood better through these schools, then it's worth it. So we will see.
I don't doubt that there are benefits to these schools, but what I think we do know is that some of these sustainable community schools are some of the worst performing academically in the city. And so, if we're really focused on academic outcomes, then I think it's an extra bad time to be making this announcement.
And enrollment is a key data point for CPS. They've had a couple of decades of enrollment dropping. The last couple of years, things have stabilized, but their finances, their enrollment, these are all numbers that are a big factor for their budget, for the city's overall profile as well.
Well, another major local entity, ComEd, Alderman Gilbert Villegas wants to force them to the negotiating table to offer some relief to customers dealing with high utility bills. Rob, does the city have much leverage that it can use to sort of try and get a deal out of them?
Well, I think anybody who has seen their ComEd bill recently, a combination of the extremely high temperatures we've been dealing with the last couple of months, running the air conditioning all the time, along with this rate increase that was passed along to the customer, there's a great deal of sticker shock going on. And that $10 million relief fund for low-income customers and for nonprofits was drained almost immediately. Just a one-time payment just to kind of lessen the sting a little bit. So it's probably a good place to start the conversation, just to talk about how this really is biting for a lot of people, especially at a time when you can't turn off the air conditioner.
Right. It's not like it's an optional thing right now if you've got one.
I thought it was interesting that Gil Villegas presented this because he's also asked for more data centers in the city, which are behind a lot of the price hikes. So it's like, do you want more data centers? They're going to hike this up, but then you want help. It's kind of circular.
The eternal balancing act of an alder person. Well, speaking of ComEd, the final member of the so-called ComEd 4, former City Club President Jay Doherty, sentenced to a year and a day in prison. Hillary, the judge admonished him as someone who put on a civic-minded, face and should have known better. Do you think that's an effective anti-corruption message?
I guess when I think about this story, what makes me smile, not in a happy way, just in this is ironic way, is that two of the biggest stories this week are about the need for relief on energy bills and then the sentencing of this ComEd consultant for corruption. And I think that's kind of all you need to know.
Yeah, for a years-long scheme to try to get a favorable legislation out of Springfield. Okay, well, another big topic we should cover before we run out of time. The Chicago Bears seems like they really are on the move, Rob.
Bear down to Arlington Heights. Kevin Warren, the team president, saying that they're engaging with leaders in Arlington Heights. So in other words, it seems like the Bears will be getting on the Jane Addams Tollway and getting off at Route 53, and they'll get off at Euclid, and that's the new home of the Bears. The Northwest Suburban Chicago Bears completing a process that began 50 years ago. George Halas wanted to put the team in Arlington Heights. Soldier Field was always seen as kind of the temporary stop after Wrigley Field. So I guess they played the long game, the really long game, the 50 years long game, and it's going to be a Northwest Suburban football stadium.
And we don't even need GPS when we've got you here guiding us all the way there, right down the expressway.
And then you take a right here, and then
but don't park in this lot, park in that lot.
But you're better off taking the train.
Well, yes.
If we have trains by then.
I was going to say, if they're funded, we would like to see that.
I still think it may be a game of chicken. I think that there may be something that can work out. I was on this 3-hour cruise with Brian Urlacher recently, and I asked him, do you think they should go to Arlington Heights? He's like, no, we get an advantage with all the snow from the lakefront, precipitation coming in on us, and those Florida guys, they can't compete. We need to stay at Soldier Field.
But it's kind of like looking at a big open field and thinking, oh, I can build a brand new house, or I can spend a fortune fixing up this old one on the lake.
Yeah.
That's really hard to get to.
That we're still paying off for the renovations when it made it look like a spaceship land on there. And it still doesn't seem like any money is forthcoming from Springfield, fair to say, or at least anything significant.
I think that's the question that I think a lot of people have, is that is there going to be any sort of taxpayer-funded assistance?
Yeah.
And we just don't know right now.
Enormously unpopular idea, but you four are enormously popular, at least with me. You've been a great panel, but we are about out of time. So my thanks to Rob Hart, Shruti Singh, Monica Eng, and Hillary Gowans. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation. Additional support is provided by
And that's our show for this Friday night. Be sure to check out our website for the very latest from WTTW News, including an interview from our archives with legendary astronaut and Lake Forest resident Jim Lovell, who died this week at age 97. Now for the Week in Review, I'm Nick Blumberg. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy, stay safe, and stay informed. Have a great weekend. And okay, we've got a piece of Jim Lovell history available to the public, is that right?
Apollo 8 at the Museum of Science and Industry, and I take my kids there, and we always have to see Apollo 8 because it was an amazing thing at the end of 1968 to see humans circling another planet on Christmas Eve. I mean, just redeeming everything that happened that year was amazing to see, and then you just realize they went to the moon in that. It's such a tiny capsule.
Yeah, it's a little terrifying. That, I mean, you see how big the SpaceX and the Blue Origin and all this stuff that's built up, and then you see this little rickety box. Like, are you sure? Was this a good idea? But I mean, it's really, kind of an inspiring story too. Obviously, it's commanding Apollo 13 as well.
Well, cheers to Captain Lovell for bringing him back alive.
Yeah.
A mission deemed a successful failure.
I think a lot of people will be streaming Apollo 13 tonight.
Good idea.
I think that is a very worthy Friday night watch for everybody involved.
Tom Hanks. All right.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that contributes to public safety policy and guidelines.